All right, so you're here with us today because chances are you're trying to level up your fitness game.
Yeah.
And you're probably wondering, what's the most effective way to really get the results I'm looking for?
hmm
And one of the big questions that a lot of people have is, you know, should I be hitting the gym and lifting those heavy free weights?
Yeah.
Or can I just get amazing results using my own body weight?
Right.
So if you've found yourself kind of in that debate,
Yeah.
trying to figure out which path is right for you,
Exactly.
well, you're definitely in the right place. Because today we're doing a deep dive into free weights versus bodyweight training.
We are.
And we've gone through a ton of research,
Yeah.
a lot of expert
A
opinions
lot of information out there.
to really distill the core differences and benefits of these two super popular
Very
particular
fun.
styles.
Right.
So we're going to break it all down for you
Yeah.
so you can make those informed decisions about your workouts,
That's the goal.
whether you're all about building muscle,
Muscle game.
getting stronger,
Mm-hmm.
boosting your endurance,
Endurance.
or maybe you're just trying to manage your weight.
It's all important.
We're going to cover it all.
Yeah.
And so before we really jump into the, all the details, let's just make sure we're all on the same page about what exactly we're talking about here.
Yeah.
When we say free weights and bodyweight training,
What do those terms really mean?
right, what are we actually comparing?
Right. So let's start with free weights.
Okay,
When we talk about free weights, we're talking about things like dumbbells,
okay.
barbells, kettlebells.
Yeah.
Really anything that you're lifting that's not attached to a machine.
Yeah.
And I think the key difference here and the thing that makes free weights unique is that you are in complete control of how that weight moves through space,
Mhm.
right? So you have this unrestricted range of motion,
Right.
which is really significant because it means that it's not just your primary muscles that are working
Mhm.
to lift that weight, but you're also engaging a whole bunch of smaller stabilizing muscles
Yeah.
that you might not even be aware of
Right.
to keep that weight balanced and controlled.
Interesting. So it's almost like it's adding this extra layer of challenge
Which is
because you're not just pushing or pulling, you're having to stabilize
having to control it.
and keep everything kind of in check.
Right. So it's a much more full body engagement in a way.
Right. And so that's what sets it apart from, like, let's say, a leg press machine. Where
Exactly.
you're kind of locked into this very specific plane of motion,
You're guided.
right? So what's the benefit then of engaging all these stabilizer muscles?
So that's actually a really great question.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do with how our bodies actually function in the real world.
Okay.
So when you think about free weights,
Mm-hmm.
you're not just building strength in this isolated gym environment.
Yeah.
You're actually building a type of strength that's going to help you in everyday life.
Yeah.
So, for example, when you do a dumbbell squat,
Okay.
it's not just your quads that are working.
Yeah.
Your hamstrings, your glutes, your core.
Yeah.
All those muscles are firing to keep you stable and balanced.
Right.
And so that translates to better stability
Okay.
when you're carrying groceries or picking up your kids.
Yeah.
Or even if you trip, those stabilizer muscles are going to help you recover your balance.
And not fall.
Exactly. So it's about building a more resilient body overall.
I like that. A resilient body.
A resilient body.
So that's free weights.
Right.
Let's talk about bodyweight training.
Okay.
What falls under that category?
So bodyweight training is often referred to as calisthenics.
Okay.
And it's essentially any type of exercise where you're using your own body weight
Yeah.
as the resistance.
Got it.
So no external weights, no machines,
Right.
just you and gravity.
Okay, so that's things like push-ups.
Push-ups,
Yep.
squats, lunges,
Yep.
planks, burpees, mountain climbers,
Yep.
pull-ups, dips, sit-ups.
So all those kind of classic
Classic exercises.
exercises, yeah.
And what's really great about bodyweight training is that it's so versatile.
Yeah.
You can really work on a wide range of physical abilities,
Yeah.
from strength and power
Mm-hmm.
to endurance, speed, flexibility, coordination, balance.
All without needing any special equipment.
No equipment needed.
Just your own body.
That's right.
That's pretty amazing.
It is. And I think that's why it's so appealing to a lot of people
Yeah.
because you can do it anywhere, anytime.
Right.
And you don't need any fancy gym membership.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier that it's inherently functional.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
So when we talk about functional fitness, we're talking about exercises that mimic the movements
Okay.
that we do in everyday life,
Yeah.
right? So think about like getting up from a chair.
Yeah.
That's a squat.
Yeah.
Reaching for something overhead.
Okay.
That's like a modified push-up against the wall.
Yeah.
So body weight exercises really strengthen those patterns, those movement patterns that
Yeah.
we use all the time.
Right.
And that makes those everyday tasks easier,
Mhm.
and it also helps to prevent injuries.
Right, because you're basically training your body
Yes.
to move the way it's supposed to move.
Exactly. And one thing I found really interesting in the research
Yeah.
was that mastering more complex body weight movements,
Okay.
like think handstands or,
Wow, yeah.
those more advanced exercises,
Yeah.
they can actually improve your proprioception.
Okay. I'm going to need you to define that for me.
Yeah, so proprioception is basically your body's awareness of where it is in space.
Okay.
So it's like that sense of knowing where your limbs are without having to look at them.
Okay. Yeah.
And that can be really helpful for things like balance and coordination.
Interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, body weight training can really improve your proprioception,
Yeah.
which can even help you, if you're walking on uneven terrain or if you trip or stumble, you're more likely to recover your balance
Yeah.
because your body has a better sense of where it is.
It's like an internal GPS almost.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we've laid the groundwork.
We have.
We know what free weights are.
Mm-hmm.
We know what body weight training is.
Yep.
Now let's really zoom in on those specific advantages.
Okay.
So starting with free weights,
Let's do it.
what are some of the key benefits that someone can expect if they consistently incorporate free weights into their workouts?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest benefits and probably the most well-known is muscle hypertrophy.
Muscle hypertrophy.
Yeah, or muscle growth.
Right.
Free weights are really, really good at building muscle.
Yeah.
And that's because they allow for this very direct and measurable form of progressive overload.
Okay. Can you remind us what progressive overload is?
Sure. Yeah. So progressive overload is the idea that to keep building muscle and strength, you need to consistently challenge your muscles by gradually increasing the demands that you're placing on them.
Right. So you're not just doing the same thing over and over again.
Exactly. You have to keep pushing your body to adapt.
Okay. So how do free weights make that so easy?
Well, with free weights, the easiest way to increase the challenge is just to add more weight.
Makes sense.
Right. So if you're doing bicep curls
Mm-hmm.
and you can curl 20 pounds for 10 reps, next time you try to curl 22 pounds for 10 reps, or 20 pounds for 12 reps. So you're constantly increasing that stimulus.
Okay.
And that forces your muscles to grow.
Yeah. And so it's very precise.
It is very precise.
Like you know exactly how much weight you're adding.
Exactly. You know exactly how much you're lifting.
Yeah.
You can track your progress over time.
Makes sense.
So it's a very measurable form of progressive overload.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, if someone is really prioritizing building noticeable muscle, free weights seem like a very efficient way.
They're a great tool for that.
To do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about muscle growth. What about overall strength gains?
Yeah. So free weights are also fantastic for developing what we call functional strength.
Okay, functional strength.
And we touched on this a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that you're not just building strength in isolation, but you're building strength.
Yeah.
That's going to translate to better movement in your everyday life.
Okay.
So again, going back to that dumbbell squat example, you're not just working your leg muscles, you're also engaging your core to maintain balance and stability.
Right.
And that's going to help you with things like lifting heavy objects, bending over, picking things up, all those movements that we do all the time.
It's like strength with a purpose.
Exactly.
Not just strength for the gym.
Right. It's about being able to use that strength in the real world.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about variety.
Okay.
Does free weight training offer enough variety to keep things interesting?
Absolutely.
Because, sometimes people get bored.
They do.
With their workouts.
They do.
So is there enough there to keep people engaged?
I think there's a ton of variety with free weights.
Okay.
You can target virtually every muscle group from multiple angles. You can do, tons of different exercises. And you can also vary the weight, the reps, that sets the tempo.
Yeah.
So you're constantly challenging your body in new ways.
Right.
And preventing plateaus.
Yeah. So it's not just about, going through the motions.
No.
It's about really finding ways to keep pushing yourself.
Exactly.
Okay. So free weights, we've got muscle growth, we've got functional strength, we've got variety.
Yeah.
Now let's explore the advantages of bodyweight training.
Let's do it.
So what are some of the key benefits there?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest advantages of bodyweight training is accessibility and convenience.
Convenient.
You don't need any special equipment.
Yeah.
You can do it anywhere.
Right. Anytime.
At home, at the park.
On vacation, in a hotel room.
Yeah, traveling.
Traveling, yeah.
This is huge for people who travel.
Huge lot, you know.
It really breaks down those barriers to exercise.
And it can also be a lot more affordable.
It's very affordable.
In a gym membership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a really great option for people who are, maybe on a budget or who just don't want to commit to a gym.
Yeah, we've talked about functional fitness quite a bit.
Yeah.
Is bodyweight training also good for that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, bodyweight training is all about those fundamental movement patterns that we use in our everyday lives.
Right.
So, like I said earlier, getting up from a chair, that's a squat. Reaching for something, that's a push-up. Carrying groceries, that's like a farmer's carry.
Right.
So you're constantly strengthening those movements that you're doing all the time.
Yeah.
And that's going to help you to move better, feel better, and reduce your risk of injury.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
What about injury risk in general?
Okay.
Is bodyweight training considered a safer approach?
It can be, yeah. So because you're not using any external weights, the load on your joints is generally lower.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's also this natural emphasis on form and technique with bodyweight training.
Why is that?
Because if you don't have good form, you're not going to be able to do the exercise.
Not going to be able to do.
You're not going to be able to do a push-up if you're all wobbly.
Yeah.
So it forces you to develop that body awareness and control, and that can actually help to prevent injuries.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's a really good option for beginners who are just starting out with strength training.
Because it's a gentler entry point.
Gentler entry point. And it helps you to build that foundation of good form.
Right.
Which you can then carry over to other types of training.
Okay, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
So we've talked about all the positives. Are there any limitations or potential downsides to either of these methods?
There are.
Let's start with free weights.
Okay.
What are some of the things that people should be aware of?
So I think the biggest limitation of free weights is the equipment.
Okay.
You need to have access to weights.
Right.
Which can be expensive.
Yeah.
And it can also take up a lot of space.
Yeah, you need a place to store it.
You need a place to store it.
Yeah, especially if you're getting a decent amount of weight.
Especially if you're trying to get strong.
Yeah.
You need a lot of weight.
Yeah.
And then there's also the risk of injury.
Yeah.
If you're not careful.
If you don't have proper form.
If you don't have proper form.
Yeah.
You can definitely hurt yourself.
Yeah, especially as the weight gets heavier.
Yeah. If you lose control of a heavy barbell, that can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
So it's really important to start light and focus on technique before you start adding more weight.
Okay. And then the other thing is, you mentioned spotter.
Spotters, yeah.
Sometimes you need a spotter.
You do, especially for certain exercises.
Yeah, like bench press.
Bench press squats.
Yeah.
Those are the big ones where you really don't want to be alone if you fail.
Yeah, you don't want to get pinned.
You don't want to get pinned under the bar.
Yeah.
So yeah, a spotter is essential for those exercises.
Right.
And not everyone has access to a spotter.
Not everyone has a workout buddy.
No.
Right.
Especially if you're working out at home.
Right.
So that can be a limitation.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I would say is that
yeah.
While free weights are great for overall muscle engagement, they're not always the best for isolating specific muscles.
Interesting.
Okay. Like if you're really trying to target, one specific muscle, you might be better off using a machine that's designed for that purpose.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so free weights, equipment can be a limitation cost space.
Yeah.
Higher risk of injury if you're not using proper form.
Right.
And then the need for a spotter sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay, now let's flip over to bodyweight training.
Okay.
What are some of the potential drawbacks there?
Yeah, so with bodyweight training, one of the main challenges can be progressive overload.
Okay.
Especially for certain muscle groups.
Yeah, which ones?
Especially legs.
Okay.
So with free weights, it's very easy to add weight to the bar.
Right, just slap on another plate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with bodyweight training, it's not always so straightforward.
Right. You can't just add more of you.
You can't just magically become heavier.
Right.
So you have to get creative. You have to find ways to make the exercises more challenging.
Yeah.
So that could be, doing more reps, slowing down the tempo, doing single leg variations, or progressing to more advanced exercises like pistol squats or
those are
one-arm push-ups.
Yeah.
But even then,
Yeah.
it can be tough to really overload
Okay.
those leg muscles in particular.
So if you're really serious about building some serious leg strength, you might eventually need...
You might need some weight.
To add some weight.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other thing with bodyweight training is that tracking progress can be a little bit trickier.
Okay, why is that?
Well, with free weights, you can very clearly see how much weight you're lifting.
Right.
You know, you can see those numbers going up.
Yeah, I lifted 20 pounds last week. I'm lifting 25 this week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with bodyweight training, it's more about how the exercise feels and how many reps you can do.
Right.
And that can be a little bit more subjective. And it can also be influenced by things like your body size.
Yeah.
And your limb length.
Your leverages.
Your leverages, exactly. Yeah. So you know what might be really challenging for someone who's tall might be relatively easy for someone who's shorter.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so body weight training, progressive overload can be a little bit more challenging.
It can be.
Tracking progress might be a little bit more subjective. And then those individual body mechanics can play a role.
A big role, yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about how these two methods stack up.
Okay.
For different fitness goals that you, the listener, might have.
Right.
So let's start with muscle gain.
Muscle gain.
Which method is going to be more effective?
I think both methods can be effective
Okay.
for building muscle.
Okay.
But I think free weights probably have a slight edge.
Okay, why is that?
Yeah. So free weights allow for that very direct and measurable form of progressive overload.
Yeah, we talked about that.
We talked about that.
Yeah.
You know, you can just keep adding weight to the bar.
Right.
And that's going to force your muscles to grow.
And it's a very clear progression.
Very clear progression.
Yeah.
With bodyweight training, you have to get a little bit more creative to increase the challenge.
Yeah.
But you can certainly still build muscle.
Yeah.
With bodyweight training.
That's possible.
It's definitely possible. Yeah. And actually for beginners, I think bodyweight training is a great place to start.
Okay.
Because it teaches you those fundamental movement patterns.
Right.
And it helps you to develop that body awareness.
Yeah.
And control.
So build that solid foundation.
Build that foundation, yeah.
Okay.
But if you're really serious about maximizing muscle growth, I think free weights are probably the way to go.
Okay. Free weights, slight edge.
Slight edge, yeah.
For muscle gain. What about overall strength development?
So for strength development, again, both methods can be effective.
Okay.
But free weights are generally considered to be a little bit better for building overall strength. Yeah. Especially when it comes to compound movements.
Compound movements, those multi-joint exercises.
Yeah, like squats, deadlifts, bench press.
Yeah.
Those are the exercises that are really going to build full body strength.
Right.
And free weights allow you to lift a lot more weight in those exercises than you could with just your body weight.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so that's going to lead to greater strength gains.
Exactly.
Okay, so free weights edge again?
Yeah, I think so.
For strength? Yeah. Now, what about endurance?
Endurance.
Yeah, muscular endurance.
So for muscular endurance, both methods can be effective.
Okay.
But I think bodyweight training might have a slight advantage.
Okay.
Because a lot of bodyweight exercises are naturally high rep.
Yeah.
You know, you can do a lot of push-ups. You can do a lot of squats. You can do a lot of lunges.
You can crank them out.
Yeah, you can crank them out.
Yeah.
And that's really good for building muscular endurance.
Okay.
Free weights can also be used for endurance training.
Right.
But you generally have to use lighter weights.
Okay.
And do higher reps.
Yeah.
Which can be a little bit more challenging to maintain good form.
Yep.
So body weight training might be a little bit easier to stick with.
For endurance.
For endurance, yeah.
All right.
And then there's also the cardiovascular aspect of body weight training. So if you're doing a circuit or a high-intensity interval training workout with body weight exercises, you can really get your heart rate up.
Yeah.
And improve your cardiovascular fitness.
So it's kind of like a 2-for-1.
2-for-1, yeah.
Yeah.
You're working on your muscles.
Yeah.
And your heart.
And your heart all at the same time.
All at the same time.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, what about weight loss?
So for weight loss, again, both methods can be effective.
Okay.
Because they both burn calories.
Yeah.
And they both help you to build muscle, which increases your metabolism.
Yeah.
So you burn more calories at rest.
Even when you're not working out.
Even when you're not working out.
That's the dream.
That's the dream, right?
Yeah.
But I think the key to weight loss is really finding a type of exercise that you enjoy and that you can stick with.
Consistency is key.
Consistency is key.
Yeah.
Because if you're not consistent,
right,
it doesn't matter how many calories you burn.
It's not going to work.
In a single workout.
Yeah, you've got to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
Okay, so both can work.
Both can work, yeah.
For weight loss. It really depends on your preferences.
And your goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the science.
Okay.
What does the research tell us about muscle activation?
Muscle activation. Yeah. So research has shown that free weight exercises generally lead to greater muscle activation than body weight exercises.
Why is that?
So this is because when you're lifting a free weight, your body has to work harder to control that weight and to keep it stable.
Right.
So you're engaging more muscles to do the exercise.
Yeah.
And this is especially true for those stabilizer muscles.
Right. We keep coming back to those.
Yeah, those little guys that are so important for injury prevention and for functional strength.
Now, that doesn't mean that bodyweight exercises don't activate muscles.
No, they definitely do, especially compound movements like push-ups and squats.
Right.
But the added challenge of controlling an external weight just seems to lead to greater activation overall.
So more muscles working.
More muscles working.
Potentially more calories burned.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, what about overall fitness outcomes?
Overall fitness outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's actually been a lot of research on this topic.
Yeah.
And the findings are pretty interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So when you look at meta-analyses.
Meta-analyses, so these are like...
Yeah, these are studies that look at...
Big overviews.
Big overviews, of lots of different studies to try to get a big picture of what the research says.
Got it.
They haven't found any significant differences between free weight training